Hi, I'm Katherine Ashmore and welcome to the Mindset Exchange. Today's episode is an important conversation about a side of leadership and entrepreneurship that doesn't get talked about enough. The pressure to look good, with more video, more visibility, and being the face of your personal brand. I'm joined by Marcelle Rose, a nutritionist and eating specialist, and we're talking about the mindset around food, body image and control, and why quick fixes, including fat-busting drugs, don't always build lasting confidence. Gentle note, if disordered eating is something you're navigating right now, this may be one to come back to when it feels right. Here goes. Hi Marcelle, welcome. It is so lovely to have you on the podcast. We've known each other for a little while now, since I asked you to be a guest speaker during the pandemic on one of my communities. And I have seen the incredible work you do and the advice you've given to my community as well. So it's lovely to have the chance to speak to you again. Since you were last on as a guest, you've released not one, but two books, one being The Binge Freedom Method, which became a bestseller. Huge congratulations and well deserved. Could you start by telling listeners a bit about yourself, your journey, and what you're up to at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that lovely introduction, for having me back with you. So I am an emotional and disordered eating specialist. I'm a BANT registered nutritionist and health coach as well. And essentially, my job is to help empower women in particular to overcome binge eating, bulimia, emotional eating and restrictive eating behaviours so that they can essentially reclaim their life.
Often we find that leaders and entrepreneurs are driven people. What would you say stands out about how food and body image shows up for them?
Yeah, well, I've worked with a fair few entrepreneurs over the years, and what I see is that obviously entrepreneurs tend to be very driven, often quite perfectionist, and that kind of those characteristics of personalities can often spill over into certain amounts of perfectionism in other areas of their life. So sometimes I do see people struggling with their relationship with food, in that maybe they are trying to use it as a sense of control, or there's that rigidity around that, or feeling like they need to be perfect in all aspects of their life. And when I say perfect, really in inverted commas, because I don't believe in perfection when it comes to food and eating. It's really much more about a flexible approach. But I also see a lot of people who, as entrepreneurs, leaders, that it can be pretty stressful at times, and often people turning to food as a sort of sole coping mechanism.
Yeah, quite often I explore shifting from that perfect focus to a useful focus. And that simple reframe can make all the difference, not just in work, but how one approaches eating too, I imagine. Those same traits that drive success in business can also create pressure in this area. And sometimes perfectionism is often praise. And there are times where it can be quite useful in some jobs. But how do you see it working against people when it comes to food and body image? I know you've touched on it lightly there, but going into a bit more detail, why might these same traits that drive success also create pressure in this area?
Yeah, so it's really around, I suppose, people feeling that they have to be perfect, they have to do everything perfectly. So we start to see people following very rigid meal plans, for example, and there becomes this all or nothing kind of approach to things, where if they're not eating absolutely perfectly or doing the absolute, keeping up with their sort of fitness regime in a perfect way, then that means they've kind of blown it all, and then people can end up going the other way. So there's very much that sometimes I've blown it thinking if they're not perfect, or for some people there's extreme rigidity and they're able to restrict, and obviously that doesn't end well when there's becomes that serious rigidity and restriction. And if you think around the types of foods they're eating, the amounts of foods they're eating often becomes very, very narrow, and they're missing out on a lot of things. And that starts to impact in all areas of their physical, mental and emotional health, really.
Yeah, and I think mindset can often feed into it. It's quite common to have a all or nothing mindset or approach. It's so common in a lot of leaders and entrepreneurs because they're so driven. And what would you say is the cost to them?
Just in terms of the people that I work with, and I work with a lot of people who struggle perhaps with binge eating, or they see themselves as emotional eaters, the all or nothing very much keeps them stuck in the same cycle. So what happens is they feel like they've blown it. I've blown it thinking, so I might as well just carry on and start again the next day or the next week. So there's often a lot of shame that comes with that when they feel like they have failed in something, and shame then often leads to more of the same. Mindset wise, it really plays a huge role. It really has a big impact on them, and we just see people stuck in this relentless cycle and feeling like they can't ever get out of it, and they don't know what to do, and that they failed and that they're out of control, etc. So it can
Yeah.
really affect self-worth in a big way, which I imagine can spill over into the work situation as well.
Yeah, and stress in reality plays a huge part in leadership and entrepreneurship. What sort of stress behaviors or commonalities do you see that people might want to be mindful of when it comes to their eating patterns or behaviors, would you say?
Yeah, so I see a lot of turning to food to cope. So often people might label themselves as an emotional eater, so it might be a bit of a sort of grazing situation where perhaps their eating might be quite chaotic, so they may not be eating regular meals. They might not have time for regular meals if they feel like they don't have time or don't make time for it. So in essence, they've got this stress building up. They're eating on the go very often, snacking a lot, and often the energy is low, so it's going for sort of more sugary foods just to keep them going. For some people who do struggle with binge eating, for example, then it will be turning to that food. And binge eating is a little bit different in the way that it's very much eating a large amount of food in a very short space of time. There's a huge amount of shame wrapped into that, and it's very secretive usually. So it might be that someone's powering through during the day with their work and not necessarily thinking about their food during the day, but then when they get home, it can turn into a binge situation to just as a release almost.
Yeah, and the other side of it is the pressure side of it at the time. If they're so busy, sometimes they forget to eat, don't they? And then
Yeah.
they're like suddenly get home exhausted and just eat to try and replenish the energy and go into
Yeah.
these sort of like patterns, yo-yo patterns, where the food choices may not be the perfect balanced diet that might be helpful for them. And the stress that impacts into it. I often talk with clients about when it comes to the business context rather than the area of what you do, when it comes to stress, just doing those tiny actions that I call confidence reps, those simple actions that help you stay steady under pressure. With food, I wonder if it can be the same. It's often about maybe one manageable choice in the moment rather than trying to get everything exactly right. And what sort of advice do you give to people in that sort of situation?
Yeah, rather than trying to do everything all perfectly, it's really about, okay, let's get the basics in, let's get the kind of scaffolding in. And I'd say one of the key things to do is to get your regular meals in. For some people, that sounds, well, that's a bit of a basic answer, but for some people, that can be a huge task, but they can be very daunting, very overwhelming. For many people, they are skipping breakfast. Perhaps they've been fasting, or they just don't feel hungry in the morning, which is very common. But actually, once you start to put in a breakfast, it can make a huge difference throughout the day. And what people find is they begin to feel this sort of healthy hunger coming once they start to put something in. And I say healthy hunger because I think with a lot of the chat around at the moment of food noise that we hear, the media talking about all the weight loss drugs, there's a lot of fear around hunger, but hunger is a good and important sign that we need to listen to our bodies to actually make sure that we're eating. So I would say regular eating and being a bit prepared. So yes, it's probably quite overwhelming for many people to do a week's meal plan. But I'd say make sure that you're a bit intentional about if you need a snack, can you bring something with you that might be a bit more balanced, that includes maybe a bit of protein in it. It can be as simple as a piece of fruit and some nuts, or nut butter and apple, or something like that. It doesn't have to be sweet, it can be savoury as well. But it's just a little bit of pre-planning and thinking, okay, what am I going to need? What's my day looking like? If I got back-to-back meetings, how am I going to get something in for lunch? Where am I going to get it from? Am I bringing it with me? Is there somewhere and some time that I can get it? Just being a little bit prepared in terms of the planning side of things and organised.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because I know in my own experience, if there's what I call rubbish in the house or where I'm working, it's very easy just to grab that. So one can be really intentional and think about what options you have around you, whether you take them in beforehand or whether you bring them with you, so that you don't have to think about it. They're just there and they're healthier options and they give you more energy. And certainly having breakfast kickstarts metabolism as well, which goes into what you're saying about healthy hunger being a good sign. You also mentioned, interestingly, about the fat busting drugs. And I think we should talk about that a bit, because one of the all or nothing behaviors is this pressure, often for people having to be their own personal brand at the moment, especially as entrepreneurs, where you're in front of the camera, you're on social media, there's maybe societal pressure to look good, whatever that means. And there's this wonder drug, or so-called wonder drug, that's out there that I believe was originally for people with diabetes, and now it's being used in the mainstream. There's a lot of conversation about these GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic, for example, and I'm sure there are other medications out there as well. In your view, where have they been used well, and what would you say is the evidence for using this medication?
Okay, so I think there are definitely benefits for certain people. And I think if people are getting them via the NHS, then hopefully they're being monitored in a appropriate way. And certainly, yeah, as you say, they have been helpful for people with diabetes. They are helping. And there are some people who are getting them who are medically eligible via the NHS. And for sure, it is helping them be able to move more, to be able to eat in a different way. Where my concern is what I'm seeing, and I'm getting people coming to me who aren't medically eligible, who I would say, I don't like using the BMI, but we have it, so we have to use it on the perhaps on the sort of average to lower end of the BMI. People are able to get hold of these medications privately with very little screening. And because I work with people with eating disorders, for example, then someone with body image issues, they will try and get hold of these medications. There's a lot of people that are, and I think there's a danger there. So that's for those people. There's also a danger that if you're not working on your relationship with food, you're not working on the root of the issues, then essentially, as soon as you come off the medication, the likelihood is that you're going to, well, we know the science shows that you do rebound in weight gain, and also the cravings come back, because a lot of people talk about this food noise, that it goes away, but as soon as you discontinue, the cravings come back. So it's putting that work in to be able to manage that, because many people can't be on these drugs for long term because of cost, because of side effects. And I think some people don't want to be on them for long term because we don't know the long term effects of them on the body biologically. We have limited data in terms of years, a few years, rather than lifelong data. So there's pros and cons. There is evidence that people do lose weight on them, but it's whether they're going to remain on the drug long term or what they can do to help support them when they come off the drug.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think I read somewhere that actually there's only evidence for its use in terms of its impact on people for about 2 years of prescription. Maybe I'm wrong. And after that, there hasn't been enough evidence collated to know what the long-term effects of this are. What do we know so far about the benefits and risks and long-term impact out with the 2 years? Do we know anything about that? Or
well, we don't. I can't remember exactly the number of years. I think they might have 4 years or so on, particularly looking at the dosage used for weight loss. They've got a bit longer looking at what was used. So we originally had Ozempic, which was created for use in diabetics. So essentially those, we have a little bit longer in terms of the research on that. Then the same pharmaceutical company rebranded and created something called Wegovy, which was at a higher dose than the original Ozempic for use for weight loss. And then we have other companies now coming in. We've got Mounjaro as well. And they're slightly different in that they are mimicking the appetite hormone GLP-1, and Mounjaro is also mimicking GIP as well. So essentially, we know that's just one of the appetite hormones or two of the appetite hormones, but there are also other appetite hormones like ghrelin and leptin. And we don't really know in the long term how that will affect other hormones, for example, biologically. We don't know, does that mean some hormones might be down-regulated in the future or up-regulated? We don't know. So I think there's a lot we don't know about them, but what we do know is there are some side effects that some people experience. Some of them are mild and some of them don't last that long, but for some people I have clients that are on them, and certainly things like hair loss is a big one that we're seeing, but also digestive issues, and there's some quite serious digestive issues, but also more serious things like pancreatitis, certain risks of certain cancers and eye disease, for example. So I think it's really important that if someone is looking into them, that they really look at the cost versus benefit analysis for them as an individual, because for everyone it's going to be different.
Yeah. And I think, thank you for sharing that, Marcelle. I think that can often be a pattern with high achievers where they look for a quick fix. Not everyone, but it can happen. And I think whether that's a new system in business or the latest health solution, and these drugs might create an opportunity, but as you say, there's not been enough time given to see how it impacts people. And really, lasting change only really happens when people start shifting how they think about themselves or about their eating habits and build confidence in their own decisions. And when it works well, do these medications shift the deeper relationship people have with food, or do the same tendencies, perfectionism, stress, emotional triggers tend to remain, would you say?
Yeah, I think from my perspective and from the clients that I see, it's not necessarily going to deal with body image, because I know that from people who've lost weight through other means in the past, it doesn't necessarily improve your body image. That's something that needs to be done to work on your self-worth, self-esteem, acceptance of your body wherever it is. I know a lot of people feel like if I just lose weight, then I'll be more confident. But actually, the problem is that we're in this society that is very kind of diet culture driven, and there's a lot of weight stigma in our society, which actually has such a negative impact on people. So that will always be there at the moment anyway. And I think if you're not working on your own self-worth and self-esteem and knowing that actually you are good enough as you are, whether you're a bigger or smaller size, then those underlying body image issues can still be there. I think people can be very, very triggered as well by comments about your weight. And if someone, for example, says, "Oh, you look amazing, you've lost so much weight," for some people, they can think, "Well, what did you think about me before when I was in a bigger body?" Or there's that huge fear that, what will you think of me when I regain the weight? What does that mean about me? So I personally feel we need to move away from that as the focus of our appearance being an important part of our worth, and really focusing on our worth.
Absolutely. And I think there's quite a correlation. I think people, it's sort of like a catch-22. People are super busy. They might not be eating enough. And then when they do, they might be eating the wrong foods. And therefore, there can be weight gain. And they haven't got time necessarily, or haven't made time necessarily to exercise or think about all the pillars of well-being that you need to be healthy. And it's an easy trap. And this is one of the reasons why I asked you about the medication, because I know that people do take it, and not just diabetics. And I think when the quick fixes or external supports go away, people can often slip back into old habits. And it's about addressing habits that work for you, that are easy and manageable to implement in small steps. And quite commonly in my coaching, I will help leaders build practical backup plans as well, so they don't feel like they're starting from scratch. And I imagine that could work the same with food, do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is all about the small steps. Otherwise, it's too overwhelming and then it's not sustainable. So it's very much that the coaching is very much part of that process, that you're also, even though obviously my background is a nutritionist, and a lot of people think, well, a nutritionist will just give you a meal plan and send you away and say, go and do that. But really, the most important part of the work is the coaching around it. Yes, I'm there to provide support and resources and help, I suppose, share the food wisdoms. But at the same time, I'm very much a believer that everyone is the expert of their own body, but that most people have become disconnected to their own body. And it's about reclaiming that and working step by step towards it in small, very small steps. It's that sort of climbing the mountain. You're not going to do it without your tools and strategies along the way. So you've got to pick up things along the way, up the mountain as you go, which makes it easier rather than trying to just do everything at once.
Yeah, 100%. And if someone listening recognizes they're stuck in these cycles of diets, yo-yo dieting, stress eating, or leaning on medication, what's one way they could start to build something more sustainable, would you say, Marcelle?
I would say, look at going back to the regular meals. I know I harp on about it a lot, but I can't tell you, it's not everything. We do a lot of different work, but I can't tell you the difference it can make. I just had another new client literally start a few weeks ago with quite a serious eating disorder, and she's fully at the point where she's ready to do the work, but she just can't believe what a difference it's made, because her eating was so chaotic and so all over the place. And I see this time and time again. So I would say, even if someone doesn't have an eating disorder, or they might be a bit disordered in their eating, or have done diets and diets and diets over the years, think of just a little bit of, okay, where can I start? And to say I'm going to start with 3 meals, 2 snacks is often too much for somebody. So start small. Okay, can I put in a breakfast? Can I bring myself a snack for lunch? Can I think about perhaps cooking double for dinner and bringing in my leftovers for lunch the next day? Something like that, simple things. But that's just really the basic place to start, but it's an important place to start, because that really helps stabilize your blood sugar. It helps you getting in the nutrients that you need. And all of these nutrients, just thinking about variety over time is really important, because that's giving your body and your mind what it needs. So if you think about dealing with stress and all the other things that come with life, you're actually giving your body the raw materials to do what it needs to do effectively.
I completely hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with what you're saying, Marcelle, because I can actually think of an example for myself. I used to be one of those people, when I woke up, this maybe in my 30s, when I was really busy in advertising, or late 20s, I wouldn't have breakfast first thing in the morning because I wasn't hungry. and I'd maybe have something later. And then what I noticed was that I'd be hugely hungry in the afternoon, even though I'd had lunch, and I'd be snacking more. Whereas when I started introducing, even if I wasn't hungry, having a healthy breakfast, I then didn't want to snack at all in the afternoon because I was getting what I needed, and I wasn't getting those highs of blood sugar or lows of blood sugar where you absolutely crave things. So I completely hear what you're saying from my own personal experience. And going back to that point where what you were saying about the medications, nutritional, all the essential vitamins and minerals that you need, that's the other side effect, isn't it? If when you take these fat busting medications, is if you aren't thinking about carefully about what you are eating and how you're going to wean off it, there have been incidences. I think there's a rise in malnutrition as well. So that's something else to.
Absolutely, because essentially what it's doing is completely reducing your appetite down. So if you think about, okay, you have to be really intentional about what you're getting into your diet in terms of what you can manage to eat. For most people, they find it very hard to overeat on these medications. So it's like, and that's what I'm working with the people that I am helping who are on these medications is, okay, how can we make sure you're getting in the nutrients first that you need whilst you're on, because obviously their appetite has completely shrunk. So it's very easy to end up with nutritional deficiencies, which can affect you in so many different ways.
This is where habit formation can be quite useful, actually, where you're thinking about looking at the habits you need to implement, even in diarising it. I mean, sometimes I talk to my clients in the business context of, even when it comes to exercise, the same could be applied to food intake. They're so busy, they won't necessarily make time for it unless they diarise it. And even if it's diarising a 20 minutes just to think about what you're going to eat or things like that, so that you get back into a healthy eating pattern, that can be really, really helpful. And it's those small things that build resilience and confidence over time. And everyone's human, they can slip up, but it's about trusting yourself to steady again, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you haven't got the time in to do your shop or do an online order or whatever is easier for you, you are almost setting yourself up to fail, because if you haven't got the food at home, it's going to be difficult. So just simple things like putting in the diary, exactly, that's what I talk about with my clients. Put time in the diary so that you are actually doing your online order, or you're doing a little bit of a plan in your head or writing it down to think about, okay, what am I going to eat over the next few days? What do I need?
Yeah. And is there anything else in this area that I haven't asked you that you think would be quite useful for the audience to know?
Well, just in terms of, I suppose, overall, in terms of dealing with any kind of disordered eating, it's not just about the food. It's also about your mindset, which is obviously something that you are very into.
Yes, just a bit.
Thoughts that come up, noticing unhelpful or harmful thoughts, even what keeps coming up for you, automatic thoughts about your body, for example. And we were talking about feeling like you've got to look good in front of maybe on social media, in front of the camera, on Zoom or wherever in person. What are the thoughts that are coming up? Because they can be really quite damaging. So it's working on that area, working on emotional regulation as well is really important. So actually trying to tune into and feel the feelings and label them. And also just things like slowing down, mindful eating, and tuning into your appetite and hunger and satiety cues is one of the big parts of the work that I do with people. That's something that people can actually start doing now. Start to tune in. How hungry on a scale of 1 to 10 were you before you ate? How hungry after you ate? And start to tune in and think, how do I know that I'm actually hungry? Because most people know when they're really hungry and really full, but they don't know the nuance of what comes in between. When are they starting to get hungry, and is it a good time to actually eat now rather than just pushing on with work or ignoring those signals, because that can be a risky sort of situation for overeating, compulsive eating, binge eating or emotional eating.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's getting into that regular pattern of eating and not being worried by it and just trying things out, isn't it? Going back to your point about the way you speak to yourself, that falls into that harsh inner critic speak, the inner voice saying you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're going, oh my God, you just look like a whatever. And actually you don't. And there's no way you would speak to a friend like that. So it's when you're having those moments where you're saying, I don't look good today, catch yourself and think, is this actually a really constructive way that I should be speaking to myself? Because the work that I do is also about how you talk to yourself, because the brain believes what you tell it. So if you tell it you don't look good, it's going to believe you don't look good. When you catch yourself thinking those thoughts that aren't constructive, think, is this helpful? And maybe reframe it into something that could be a bit more positive. So you're feeding more positive associations with your image into your brain. And I think that can be helpful. Is that the sort of work that you do as well, Marcelle?
Yeah, absolutely. The reframing is really important. And I always say it's not about gaslighting yourself, it's about that shift in perception. Is this helpful? First of all, is this thought a fact or fiction? No, because thoughts aren't facts. So actually, how can I reframe this? I often say to people, we do an exercise task with people where we say, can you notice some of these unhelpful thoughts and write it down? But when you write it down, write it as, I notice I was thinking I look really bleak today, whatever. So write down, I noticed that I was thinking this, and then you think about your reframe. Okay, what would be a more helpful thing to say right now? And then you can come up with a slight shift in perception. It's a slight change that actually you can accept as, that's okay. That makes sense. I'm not lying to myself, but it's giving me something to think about rather than just this. Because as you say, a lot of this, it's so harmful, isn't it? These negative thoughts that half the time we don't even realize we're doing it until you pay attention to it. They're actually probably creating all sorts of physiological changes in the body without us even realizing.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful advice, Marcel. I could chat with you for ages, but in fact, I think we need to finish off. And I just want to ask you one final question, which is a question I ask all my podcast guests. What's one book you would recommend to others and why? And it doesn't have to be about eating or personal development. It can be anything.
Oh, so many to think of. I touched on the whole weight stigma and actually the whole society. Then I think a good book to start with is The Health at Every Size book, because I think we are in such a way, and especially if you're quite triggered by this whole weight loss conversation at the moment with the drugs and everything, I think it's a really good look, a different way of looking at things, because our society is very weight centric. So it's a different way of seeing, actually, if you're talking around health, what are healthful behaviours that don't focus on weight loss and why it matters and what difference it can make. And it's a very interesting book to get stuck into. It's been around quite a while.
Thank you for that, Marcel. I always think all of us come to this world with all our different gifts and experiences, different looks. No one's perfect. And if anyone has been triggered by this conversation, I would say do get in touch with Marcelle and have a conversation with Marcelle. She's absolutely brilliant and really helpful and has been so helpful to members of my community. So thanks for being here, Marcelle. It was really lovely to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Mindset Exchange. I hope this conversation gave you a few moments of reflection around food, pressure and confidence, and perhaps permission to take a softer, more considered approach. If this episode resonated and you'd like support around disordered eating, you can find more about Marcelle and her work in the show notes. And if you'd like support around mindset, focus and confidence, or any of the areas I touched on today, you'll also find ways to connect with me and my programs there. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.